June 14, 1944. The beaches of Normandy still smelled of smoke and salt water. Sergeant Rachel Morrison crouched behind a shattered stone wall in the village of Saint Laurent, her hands gripping the handles of her M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun. 200 yards across the open field, German MG42 gunners had her squad pinned down. The sound of that weapon was unmistakable, a buzzsaw ripping through the air at 1,200 rounds per minute. Her men called it Hitler's zipper because of how the bullets stitched across anything in their path. But Rachel had something the Germans were about to learn to fear, something that would turn their confidence into terror and their laughter into silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The German soldiers manning the MG42 positions had been fighting since the invasion began 5 days earlier. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had faced Soviet waves and survived. Their weapon, the Maschinengewehr 42, was considered the finest machine gun ever created. Light, portable, devastatingly fast. They had mowed down Allied soldiers by the hundreds during the initial landings. The Americans, they believed, had nothing that could match it. They were wrong. What they didn't know was that the ungainly-looking weapon mounted on its tripod in Rachel Morrison's hands was about to rewrite the rules of infantry combat. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun weighed 84 pounds without its tripod. It fired rounds as thick as a man's thumb. Each bullet weighed nearly 2 ounces and traveled at 2,900 feet per second. When those rounds hit, they didn't just wound. They destroyed. Rachel had been trained on the M2 at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, 6 months earlier. She was one of the first women assigned to a forward combat unit as a specialist weapons operator. The brass had been skeptical, a woman operating the heaviest machine gun in the American arsenal. But Rachel had grown up on a ranch in Montana, hauling hay bales and fixing tractors since she was 12. Strength wasn't her problem. Neither was determination. Her instructor, a grizzled master sergeant named Dutch Kowalski, had told her something on her first day with the mowed, as they called it. This weapon doesn't ask permission. It makes statements. When you pull that trigger, you're not requesting the enemy leave. You're erasing them from existence. Learn to respect that power, and you'll never lose a fight. The Germans across the field had no idea what was coming. They had faced American Browning automatic rifles and 30 caliber machine guns, respectable weapons, certainly, but nothing that frightened experienced soldiers. The MG42 could fire twice as fast as American machine guns. Its rate of fire was so high that individual shots blurred into a continuous roar. German doctrine emphasized this psychological effect. The sound alone could break enemy morale before the bullets even arrived. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, commanding the German machine gun position, had been fighting Americans for less than a week, but he had already developed a dismissive attitude. These were not the hardened Soviets he had faced at Stalingrad. These Americans were soft, well-fed, and inexperienced. They died easily. What Richter didn't understand was that American doctrine had evolved around a completely different philosophy. The Germans had designed the MG42 for suppressive fire, throw so many bullets downrange that the enemy couldn't move, keep their heads down, win through psychological dominance. The Americans had designed the M2 for something else entirely: absolute destruction. Every round fired from a 50 caliber Browning carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate concrete blocks, punch through engine blocks, and tear limbs from bodies. The M2 wasn't designed to suppress, it was designed to eliminate. When an M2 opened fire, whatever it was shooting at ceased to exist as a functional threat. Not wounded, not suppressed. Gone. Rachel's squad had been pinned down for 20 minutes. 3 men were wounded, 2 were dead. The German MG42 positions had them in a perfect crossfire. Every time someone tried to move, that terrible buzzsaw sound would erupt and bullets would kick up dirt in deadly lines. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, the squad leader, crawled over to Rachel's position. His face was streaked with dirt and blood from a grazing wound on his forehead. "We need those guns silenced, Morrison. Think the mowed can reach 'em?"
Rachel studied the German positions through the smoke. 2 MG42 nests, one in the remains of a farmhouse window, another behind sandbags near a burned-out truck. Both were well protected from rifle fire. The 30-caliber machine guns they had couldn't punch through the cover. But 50-caliber rounds didn't care about sandbags or brick walls. Rachel checked her ammunition. The M2 fed from a metal belt holding 105 rounds. She had 4 belts ready, over 400 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. Each bullet had a hardened steel core designed to punch through armor, followed by an incendiary compound that ignited on impact. These rounds were designed to destroy vehicles and aircraft. Against human targets behind cover, they were nightmarish. She loaded the first belt, pulled back the charging handle twice to chamber a round, and settled into position behind the weapon. The M2's spade grips fit perfectly in her hands. The butterfly trigger sat between her thumbs. Through the iron sights, she could see the muzzle flash of the German MG42 in the farmhouse window. Sergeant Chen tapped her shoulder. "Let him up." Rachel pressed the trigger. The M2 Browning roared to life with a deep, authoritative thunder that was completely different from any other weapon on the battlefield. Not the sharp crack of rifles, not the chattering buzz of the MG42. This was the sound of industrial violence, a rhythmic pounding that announced death had arrived. The recoil pushed against Rachel's shoulders in steady pulses as the weapon fired at a measured 450 rounds per minute. Each massive bullet tore through the air with a distinctive crack that sent shockwaves rippling outward. The German soldiers in the farmhouse had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what was happening before their world ended. The first 50-caliber round punched through the brick wall next to the window as if it were paper. The second round hit the MG42 itself, and the weapon exploded into fragments of twisted metal. The 3rd through 10th rounds walked across the window opening in a devastating pattern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The German gunner simply disappeared. One moment he was there, the next he was transformed into a pink mist and scattered fragments. His loader, crouched beside him, was hit by 2 rounds that passed completely through his torso and buried themselves in the stone wall behind him. The wall itself began to disintegrate as more rounds impacted, each bullet carving fist-sized holes through masonry that had stood for 200 years. In 5 seconds, Rachel had fired 38 rounds and completely eliminated the first German position.
The farmhouse window was now a gaping hole surrounded by shattered brick. Smoke poured from the opening. Nothing inside moved. The second German position, behind the sandbags near the truck, tried to return fire. The MG42 gunner there, a veteran named Otto Schneider, swung his weapon toward the American position and opened fire. His bullets kicked up dirt and stone chips around Rachel's position. But the American machine gun emplacement had been well prepared. Rachel was behind a reinforced position with timber supports and packed earth. The German rounds, deadly against exposed infantry, couldn't penetrate her cover. Rachel shifted her aim to the second target. The sandbags protecting the German position looked formidable, but sandbags were designed to stop rifle bullets and shell fragments. They were not designed to stop 50-caliber armor-piercing rounds traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Rachel fired a sustained burst of 40 rounds directly into the sandbag wall. The effect was catastrophic. The massive bullets tore through the bags as if they were filled with feathers rather than sand. Each round that penetrated exploded in a shower of sand and incendiary fire. The bags themselves began to shred and collapse. Behind them, Otto Schneider felt impacts hitting the MG42's shield and then his own body. The first round that found him entered through his chest and exited through his back, taking most of his internal organs with it. He was dead before his brain could process the pain. His assistant gunner tried to take over, But another burst from Rachel's M2 turned the entire position into a killing zone. 50 caliber rounds ricocheted off the burned truck, came through the disintegrating sandbags from multiple angles, and filled the space with supersonic metal and fire. In less than 30 seconds, Rachel Morrison had eliminated both German machine gun positions that had pinned down her entire squad. She had fired 95 rounds. Both MG42 crews were dead. Both weapons were destroyed. The carefully prepared German positions were smoking ruins. Staff Sergeant Chen stared at the devastation for a moment, then looked at Rachel with something approaching awe. "Jesus Christ, Morrison, you didn't suppress them, you erased them." Rachel ejected the spent belt and loaded a fresh one, her movements practiced and efficient. "That's what the 50 does, Sergeant. It doesn't do half measures." Chen nodded slowly, then called out to the squad. "Move up, the guns are out." The squad advanced across the field that had been a death trap moments before, and the German defenders who had been so confident were now dead or fleeing. Word of the engagement spread through the American lines that evening. Rachel Morrison, the woman gunner who had taken out 2 MG42 nests in under a minute with an M2 Browning. Within days, the story had grown. Within weeks, German soldiers in Normandy had learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the 50 caliber machine gun and to fear it above all other American weapons. The MG42 might fire faster, but the M2 fired forever. And when its bullets hit, there was no surviving. There was no walking away wounded. There was only obliteration. This is the story of how an American design philosophy of overwhelming firepower defeated German technical excellence, how industrial engineering triumphed over tactical speed, how one woman and one weapon proved that in war, the ability to destroy absolutely matters more than the ability to fire quickly. The M2 Browning had been designed in 1918 by John Moses Browning, perhaps the greatest firearms designer who ever lived. The original concept was simple. Germany had introduced heavy tanks in World War I.
The Allies needed a weapon that could punch through armor. Browning's solution was to scale up his proven 30 caliber machine gun design to fire a massive 50 caliber round. The first prototypes appeared too late to see combat in World War I, but the design was refined throughout the 1920s and 1930s. By the time World War II began, the M2 had evolved into a weapon of extraordinary reliability and power. The heart of the weapon was its operating system. Browning had designed a short recoil mechanism, where the barrel and bolt locked together for the first fraction of an inch of rearward travel, then separated. This allowed the weapon to handle the enormous chamber pressures generated by the 50 caliber cartridge while maintaining controllable recoil. The barrel itself was quick changeable. Unlike the MG42, which required complete disassembly to change a barrel, the M2's barrel could be swapped in less than 2 minutes by a trained crew. This was critical because sustained fire heated barrels to temperatures that could cause warping or failure. The barrel's rifling, with one turn in 15 inches, gave the massive bullets exceptional accuracy out to ranges that seemed impossible for a machine gun. Effective fire out to 1,800 yards. Confirmed kills at over 2,000 yards. German infantrymen discovered that the M2 could kill them from distances where they couldn't even see the American positions clearly. The ammunition was equally impressive. The standard 50 caliber BMG cartridge, Browning machine gun, was 5.5 inches long and weighed nearly 4 ounces complete. The bullet alone weighed between 650 and 700 grains depending on type, compared to 150 grains for a typical rifle bullet. The armor-piercing incendiary round, designated M8, could penetrate 1 inch of hardened steel armor at 500 yards. Against softer targets like sandbags, wooden fortifications, or vehicle bodies, it was unstoppable. The incendiary compound ignited on impact, starting fires in any flammable material and causing secondary damage beyond the bullet's physical penetration. The ball round, designated M33, was designed for general-purpose use and could still penetrate 3/4 of an inch of steel plate.
Even the tracer rounds, used to help gunners walk their fire onto targets, carried enough punch to destroy light vehicles and fortifications. The German MG42, by contrast, fired the standard 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge, an excellent rifle round certainly, but one designed for anti-personnel use. Against fortified positions or vehicles, it was far less effective. The MG42's greatest strength, its incredible rate of fire, was also a vulnerability. At 1,200 rounds per minute, it could empty a 50-round belt in 2.5 seconds. A 250-round belt lasted just over 12 seconds of continuous fire. This created logistics problems. MG42 crews required enormous quantities of ammunition to sustain fire. They also burned through gun barrels at an alarming rate. The rapid-fire heated barrels so quickly that German crews often needed to change barrels after firing just 150 rounds. The barrel change procedure, while faster than earlier German machine guns, still required stopping fire, unlocking the receiver, extracting the hot barrel with an asbestos mitt, and installing a cool barrel. Under combat stress, this took at least 15 seconds, often longer. During that time, the weapon was silent and useless. The M2 Browning, firing at 450 to 550 rounds per minute depending on adjustment, generated heat much more slowly. A well-maintained M2 could fire 200 rounds before requiring a barrel change. In practice, experienced crews learned to fire in controlled bursts that allowed air cooling between shots, extending barrel life even further.
Rachel Morrison's training at Camp Shelby had emphasized this. 6 to 9 round bursts for point targets, longer bursts only for area suppression or against vehicles. Let the weapon breathe between bursts and it will serve you all day. The psychological impact of the two weapons was completely different. The MG42's buzzsaw sound was terrifying, certainly. German propaganda emphasized this, calling it Hitler's buzzsaw and ensuring that Allied soldiers knew to fear it. The sound of an MG42 opening fire caused experienced soldiers to hit the dirt instantly. But terror and effectiveness are not the same thing. The M2's slower, heavier sound carried a different message. When soldiers heard that deep, pounding thunder, they knew that whatever was being shot at was being destroyed, not just suppressed. The sound communicated absolute finality. German soldiers who survived M2 fire often reported that the psychological effect was worse than faster-firing weapons because each round sounded like a hammer blow of doom. You could hear death arriving, one massive bullet at a time, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. By late June 1944, the American advance through Normandy had become a grinding battle through hedgerows and fortified villages. The Germans had prepared defensive positions throughout the Bocage country, using the ancient earth and stone hedge walls as ready-made fortifications. Each field was a potential killing ground. Each hedgerow hid machine gun nests and anti-tank weapons. The MG42 teams were the backbone of these defenses. German doctrine called for positioning machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire, ensuring that any American advance would face multiple guns simultaneously. The tactic was devastatingly effective against infantry assaults. American casualties were mounting. Then the 50-caliber gunners arrived at the front in greater numbers, and the equation changed. Rachel Morrison's unit, the 29th Infantry Division, was fighting through the hedgerows south of Isny. Her reputation had spread. The division commander, Major General Charles Gerhardt, had personally commended her after the Saint Laurent action. Now other units were requesting 50-caliber support for their advances. The M2 Browning, mounted on its heavy tripod, became the key to breaking German hedgerow defenses. The tactic was simple but brutally effective.
Identify the German machine gun position by its muzzle flash or by drawing fire with a small patrol. Bring up the M2. Destroy the position utterly. The 50 caliber rounds would punch through the earth and stone hedgerows, through wooden reinforcements, through sandbags, and through the German soldiers behind them. What the MG42 crews had thought were impregnable positions turned out to be death traps when an M2 opened fire on them. On June 28th, Rachel's squad was supporting an assault on the village of Villiers-Fossard. German defenders had turned the village into a fortress, with machine gun positions covering every approach. The assault company had tried twice to advance and been driven back both times with heavy casualties. The distinctive sound of MG42s echoed across the fields, a mocking reminder of German firepower superiority. Captain James Holland, commanding the assault company, was a West Point graduate who had studied military history. He knew the stories of Verdun in the Somme, where machine guns had...
Can you do it? Rachel studied the village through binoculars. She could see 4 separate MG42 positions. 1 in a church bell tower. 2 in upper floor windows of stone buildings. 1 behind a wall at the village entrance. All were at ranges between 400 and 700 yards. All were protected by thick masonry. For a rifle company or even 30 caliber machine guns, these positions would be nearly impossible to assault without massive casualties. For an M2 Browning, they were target practice. Rachel deployed her gun in a concealed position behind a thick hedgerow with a clear view of the village. Her assistant gunner, Private First Class Maria Chen, no relation to Staff Sergeant Chen, helped set up the tripod and load ammunition belts. Maria was from California, a mechanic's daughter who could field strip and reassemble an M2 in under 4 minutes. The 2 women had become a deadly team. Rachel took her time, identifying each target and planning her engagement sequence. The church tower first, as it had the best view and could spot for the other positions. Then the 2 window positions. Finally, the wall position. She would fire from the same location for all 4 targets, trusting the M2's range and accuracy. German gunners were used to repositioning after firing to avoid counter-battery fire. Rachel didn't need to move. At 700 yards, the Germans couldn't effectively return fire against her position, but she could destroy theirs. She settled behind the gun, adjusted the traversing and elevating mechanism to set her initial aim point, and prepared to fire. Captain Holland and his company watched from covered positions, ready to advance the moment the German guns fell silent. Rachel took a breath, let half of it out, and pressed the butterfly trigger. The M2 roared. At 700 yards, the flight time for a 50 caliber bullet was approximately 1 second. Rachel fired a burst of 8 rounds at the church bell tower, adjusted her aim slightly based on where she saw the tracer's impact, and fired another burst of 10 rounds. The massive bullets tore into the ancient stone tower. The German gunner up there, Corporal Hans Weber, had thought himself safe behind the thick walls. He learned differently when 50 caliber rounds punched through stone that had stood since the 1200s. The first rounds that found him tore through his body and through the wooden floor beneath him. His MG42 tumbled from the tower opening and fell 60 feet to shatter on the cobblestones below. Rachel shifted her aim to the first window position. Distance, 500 yards. She could see the muzzle flash of the MG42 as it fired at American positions on the opposite side of the village. The German gunner there had no idea he was being targeted until the first 50 caliber rounds smashed through the stone wall beside his window. The second burst walked directly through the window opening. The room behind that window became a slaughterhouse as armor-piercing incendiary rounds tore through everything inside. The German gunner and his loader were killed instantly. The MG42 itself was torn from its mount and hurled against the far wall in pieces. The third burst set fire to the wooden furniture and interior walls. Within seconds, smoke was pouring from the window. Rachel moved to the second window position without hesitation. This gunner had realized what was happening and was trying to relocate. Rachel caught him in the middle of dismounting his weapon. A 6-round burst ended his war. The massive bullets punched through the window frame, through the gunner's torso, and through the interior wall behind him. The building's ancient stone exterior might as well have been cardboard. The final position, behind the village wall, was the most exposed.
The German crew there had watched 3 of their supporting positions get obliterated in less than 2 minutes. They were trying to pack up and retreat when Rachel's final burst found them. 50 caliber rounds punched through the stone wall and through the soldiers behind it. The wall itself partially collapsed from the impacts. In less than 3 minutes, Rachel had eliminated 4 German machine gun positions that had held up an entire American company for hours. She had fired 86 rounds. 4 MG42 crews were dead or dying. 4 weapons were destroyed. The carefully prepared German defense had collapsed. Captain Holland gave the order to advance. His company swept into the village against scattered resistance. The German defenders, demoralized by the destruction of their heavy weapons, surrendered or fled. Villers-Forced fell to American control within an hour. That evening, captured German soldiers were brought to the rear for interrogation. One of them, a young private named Erich Mueller, who had been positioned near the church tower, was asked about the battle. His response was translated and recorded in the division intelligence report. "We thought we were safe behind the stone walls. Our weapons were the best in the world. We had been told the Americans were soft and their equipment inferior. Then that gun started firing. It sounded like God himself was angry. The church tower just exploded. Hans was up there. We found pieces of him on the street. The walls we trusted were nothing. The bullets came through like the stone was paper. We couldn't fight back. We couldn't even hide. That gun, it was not a machine gun like ours. It was something else, a monster." The intelligence officer noted in his report that this was the 3rd time in a week that captured German soldiers had expressed fear specifically of American 50 caliber machine guns. The pattern was clear. The MG42 might be faster, but the M2 was breaking German morale. By mid-July, the American breakout from Normandy was beginning. Operation Cobra would punch through German lines and unleash armored divisions into open country. The 50 caliber machine guns played a crucial role in the preparatory attacks. Rachel Morrison's team was attached to the 3rd Armored Division for the offensive. Her M2 was mounted on a half-track, giving her mobility to keep up with advancing armor. The combination of American tanks and 50 caliber machine guns proved devastating against German defenses. The tanks would suppress enemy positions with their main guns. The M2s would destroy any infantry trying to operate anti-tank weapons. German Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck teams, deadly against tanks at close range, couldn't get close enough to fire when 50 caliber machine guns were sweeping the battlefield. A single burst from an M2 could kill an entire anti-tank team from 1,000 yards away. On July 26th, the day Operation Cobra began. Rachel's half-track was supporting a tank company pushing through German lines near Marigny. The fighting was chaotic. German defenders were trying to fall back in order, but American air power and artillery had shattered their communications. Small groups of German soldiers were making stands wherever they could establish positions. Rachel's half-track came under fire from an MG42 position in a tree line 400 yards away. The German gunner was good, his bullets sparking off the half-track's armor and forcing the crew to take cover. The vehicle commander, Lieutenant Robert Davis, shouted to Rachel over the engine noise, "Morrison, kill that gun!" Rachel was already traversing the M2 toward the target. She could see the muzzle flash in the trees. She fired a long burst of 25 rounds, walking her tracers into the tree line. The 50 caliber bullets tore through the trees themselves, snapping branches and shredding trunks. Anything behind those trees had no protection. The German MG42 fell silent. Rachel fired another burst to make sure, then the half-track continued advancing. They passed the German position minutes later. The trees were shattered stumps. The MG42 was in pieces. The crew was dead, killed by bullets that had passed through solid wood to reach them. The message was clear. There was nowhere to hide from the .50 caliber. The advance continued for 3 days. Rachel's gun fired thousands of rounds. She destroyed machine gun nests, sniper positions, anti-tank teams, and light vehicles. The M2 never jammed, never failed, never stopped. Every time German soldiers tried to establish a defensive position, the .50 caliber would find them and erase them. By July 29th, the German lines had collapsed. The breakout was complete. American armored divisions were racing across France. The M2 Browning had proven itself as the ultimate infantry support weapon. Back in Germany, intelligence reports about the American .50 caliber machine gun were causing alarm at the highest levels. German ordnance officers had obtained samples of captured M2s and .50 caliber ammunition. Their analysis was troubling. The weapon was heavier and slower firing than the MG42, but its penetration and destructive power were in a completely different category. A report dated August 3, 1944, sent to German Army High Command, stated the facts bluntly. The American .50 caliber machine gun represents a fundamental challenge to our defensive doctrine. Our soldiers cannot survive behind cover that stops rifle and standard machine gun fire. The .50 caliber rounds penetrate fortifications we considered proof against small arms. The weapon's range exceeds our ability to suppress it with rifle or machine gun fire. Our troops report severe psychological impact. The sound and visible effects of .50 caliber fire are devastating to morale. Recommendations include improved fortifications with steel reinforcement, though this is impractical given resource constraints. The report concluded with an ominous assessment that there was no German equivalent weapon in production or development. The German arms industry, stretched to breaking point by years of war, could not produce a comparable heavy machine gun in meaningful numbers. Even if they could, the logistical burden of supplying such a weapon with its massive ammunition would be impossible given Germany's fuel and transport crisis. The Americans, by contrast, were producing M2 Browning machine guns by the thousands. The weapon was manufactured at multiple facilities across the United States. Production was so efficient that the unit cost had dropped to below $1,500 per weapon by 1944. More importantly, ammunition production was essentially unlimited. American industry was producing .50 caliber ammunition at rates that German planners could barely comprehend. Millions of rounds per month shipped across the Atlantic, distributed to every front where American forces fought. When an M2 gunner ran low on ammunition, more appeared within hours. When a barrel wore out, a replacement was available immediately. The logistics that supported the M2 were as much a weapon as the
American casualties mounted. Soldiers were pinned down in open ground by machine gun fire from bunkers that seemed indestructible. That's when someone had an idea. What if the .50 caliber machine guns could fire directly into the bunker firing slits? Rachel was called forward to attempt it. The concept was simple, but dangerous. The bunker firing slits were only about 18 inches wide and 6 inches tall, but they were the only vulnerable point. If she could put .50 caliber rounds through those slits, the bullets would ricochet around the concrete interior, turning the bunker into a death trap for its occupants. The problem was that to get a good angle, she would need to position her gun within 300 yards of the bunker, well within range of the German MG42 inside. It was Sergeant Chen who volunteered to go with her. "Morrison, you're not doing this alone. You need someone to spot and reload. I'm coming." Rachel accepted. They moved forward under cover of smoke grenades, dragging the M2 and its tripod through a drainage ditch that offered some protection. The sound of German machine gun fire was constant. Bullets cracked overhead. Artillery shells burst in the distance. This was hell, and they were advancing into it. They reached a position 280 yards from the bunker. Rachel could see the concrete structure clearly now. It was massive, built into a hillside, with earth piled around it for additional protection. The firing slit was a dark rectangle in the gray concrete. As she watched, muzzle flashes erupted from that slit, and bullets kicked up dirt 50 yards to their left where American infantry were trying to advance. Rachel set up the M2, adjusting the tripod legs to get the right elevation. She loaded a belt of straight armor-piercing ammunition. No tracers, no incendiary. Just hardened steel cores designed to punch through armor plate. Sergeant Chen lay beside her with binoculars, calling corrections. "You're about 2 feet low and 1 foot left." Rachel adjusted. "Fire when ready." She pressed the trigger. The M2 thundered. The first round struck the concrete below the firing slit, gouging chunks from the reinforced surface. Rachel adjusted her aim slightly upward and fired again. This burst found the slit. Sergeant Chen, watching through binoculars, saw the impact. "Rounds in! Keep firing!" Rachel poured fire into that narrow opening. 50 caliber bullets screamed through the slit and into the bunker interior. Inside that bunker, hell had arrived. The German soldiers who had felt safe behind 3 feet of reinforced concrete discovered that safety was an illusion when armor-piercing 50 caliber rounds came through their firing slit at 2,900 feet per second. The bullets ricocheted off the concrete interior walls at angles, each impact sending supersonic fragments and whole bullets careening through the enclosed space. The MG42 gunner was hit by 3 rounds. His loader was hit by 5. 2 other soldiers in the bunker were wounded by fragments. The MG42 itself was struck and damaged. Within 15 seconds, the bunker had gone from a secure firing position to a tomb. Rachel fired 40 rounds at that bunker. When she stopped, the German gun was silent. Smoke drifted from the firing slit. There was no return fire. Sergeant Chen confirmed it. "Target destroyed. The bunker is out of action."
Over the next 3 days, Rachel and other M2 gunners systematically neutralized bunker after bunker along the Siegfried Line. The Germans had built fortifications designed to withstand the heaviest weapons of World War I. They had not anticipated a machine gun that fired bullets capable of penetrating light armor and ricocheting through concrete interiors. The Siegfried Line, which was supposed to be impregnable, fell to American forces in weeks rather than months. The M2 Browning had broken the strongest defenses Germany could build. By November 1944, German soldiers had developed a deep and abiding fear of the American 50 caliber machine gun. Intelligence interrogations of prisoners revealed this repeatedly. When asked what American weapon they feared most, German soldiers consistently answered the 50 caliber. Not tanks, not artillery, not aircraft. The 50 caliber machine gun. Because it could find you anywhere, kill you through any cover, and never run out of ammunition. One captured German officer, a major who had fought on both the Eastern and Western fronts, was asked to compare American and Soviet weapons. His answer was recorded in November 1944. "The Soviets have numbers and they have courage. They will charge through machine gun fire until they overwhelm you. It is terrifying, but it is predictable. You know how to fight them. The Americans are different. They do not charge your machine guns. They bring their own machine guns, bigger than yours, and they destroy your positions from distances where you cannot fight back. Then they advance. You cannot stop them because they have removed your ability to resist before they even come close. The 50 caliber machine gun is the symbol of this. It is not the fastest or the lightest, but it is the most deadly. When it fires at you, you die. There is no surviving, no being wounded. You are simply erased. That is more frightening than any human wave attack." The winter of 1944 brought the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West. German forces, assembled in secret, smashed through American lines in Belgium in December, creating a bulge in the Allied front. The fighting was desperate. American units were surrounded and cut off. The weather was terrible, preventing air support. German armored columns pushed deep into Allied territory. For a few weeks, the outcome was uncertain, but even in this crisis, the M2 Browning proved its worth. American units used their 50 caliber machine guns to defend key road junctions and towns.
The M2s were mounted on every available vehicle and emplaced at every defensive position. When German infantry tried to advance, they ran into walls of 50 caliber fire that stopped them cold. German vehicles attempting to bypass defended areas found themselves under fire from M2s that could penetrate their armor. The weapon that had been designed for anti-aircraft use in 1918 proved equally effective against German half-tracks, armored cars, and even light tanks. Rachel Morrison's unit was near Bastogne when the German offensive began. Her half-track was part of the defensive perimeter around the town. For a week, she fired her M2 almost continuously. German attacks came from multiple directions. Each time, the 50 caliber machine guns broke them up. The sound of M2's firing became constant, a deep, thunderous roar that told the surrounded Americans they still had teeth. On December 23rd, when the weather cleared and American air power returned, the tide turned. But it was the ground defense that had held, and the M2 Browning had been the anchor of that defense.
A German prisoner captured near Bastogne during the battle was asked why his unit had failed to take the town. He answered simply, "The 50 calibers. We could not get close. Every approach was covered. Every attack was torn apart. We lost half our company trying to cross 400 meters of open ground. The American machine guns never stopped firing, never jammed, never ran out of ammunition. How do you fight that? You cannot." By January 1945, the German offensive had collapsed. Allied forces were advancing again. Rachel had been in combat for 7 months. She had fired over 30,000 rounds. She had destroyed dozens of German positions. She had killed enemy soldiers by the hundreds. The M2 Browning she operated had never failed her, not once. The weapon that had been designed a generation earlier was still the most reliable, most effective infantry support weapon on the battlefield. In February, Rachel was awarded the Silver Star for her actions at Aachen. The citation mentioned her courage under fire and her skill in neutralizing fortified positions. What it didn't mention was that she represented something larger. She was proof that American industrial design, American manufacturing capability, and American doctrine could defeat even the most skilled and experienced enemy. The M2 Browning she operated was not just a weapon, it was a statement. America could build the best, supply the best, and deploy the best. And when American soldiers pulled the trigger, the enemy died. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Rachel Morrison returned home to Montana in July. She brought with her the serial number plate from her M2 Browning, removed before the weapon was turned in for depot maintenance. She mounted it on the wall of her ranch house, where it stayed for the rest of her life. Visitors would ask about it. She would tell them it was from the finest weapon she ever operated. Some would ask if she was proud of what she did. She would answer honestly, "I'm proud I served. I'm proud I did my job well. I'm proud that weapon never let me down when my life depended on it." The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun remained in American service long after World War II ended. It fought in Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Weapons manufactured in 1943 were still in service in 2020, having outlasted the enemies they were built to fight and the soldiers who first fired them. The design was so fundamentally sound that no replacement was ever needed. German veterans, in the decades after the war, would occasionally gather with their former American opponents. At these reunions, the talk would inevitably turn to weapons. The Germans would praise the MG42 as a technical masterpiece, which it was. They would note its rate of fire, its reliability, its advanced design features. The Americans would listen politely and then mention the mowed.
The conversation would change. The Germans would grow quiet. Because they remembered. They remembered the sound. They remembered the impact. They remembered that no cover was sufficient. They remembered their friends and comrades torn apart by bullets as thick as a thumb. One such reunion in 1985 in Bavaria included a former German MG42 gunner named Otto Franke and Rachel Morrison herself, then 65 years old. Otto approached her cautiously. "You were a 50 caliber gunner?" Rachel nodded. 29th Infantry Division, France and Germany. Otto was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "You were good. Very good. We feared that gun more than anything else you had."
Rachel shook his hand. "Your MG42 was a fine weapon." Otto shook his head slowly. "Fast, yes, but yours was final. When the 50 fired, death followed, always." That exchange captured the truth that combat veterans understood, but civilians often missed. Technical specifications matter less than actual effectiveness. The MG42 could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. Impressive. But the M2 Browning fired rounds that destroyed whatever they hit, and it never ran out of ammunition. And it could be fired accurately out to ranges where the enemy couldn't even see the gunner clearly. In actual combat, that mattered more than rate of fire. The story of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is ultimately a story about American industrial philosophy. Build it heavy, build it strong, build it to last, give it overwhelming firepower. Then produce it in quantities that bury the enemy under sheer material superiority. This was not elegant. It was not technically sophisticated. It was brutal, direct, and absolutely effective. The Germans had pursued technical excellence with the MG42. They had succeeded in creating a masterpiece of firearms engineering. But masterpieces don't win wars when you can't produce enough of them or supply them adequately. Wars are won by weapons that work every time, that can be supplied endlessly, and that destroy the enemy so completely that his will to fight breaks. The M2 Browning was that weapon. Rachel Morrison lived to be 94 years old. She died in 2014 in Montana, surrounded by family. Her obituary mentioned her World War II service, her Silver Star, and her role as one of the first women to operate heavy weapons in combat. At her funeral, a group of veterans from various wars showed up to pay respects. Several of them were M2 gunners who had served decades after Rachel, but who considered themselves part of the same tradition. They understood what she had done and why it mattered. One of them, a veteran of Iraq, gave a short speech at the memorial. Sergeant Morrison never bragged about her service. She didn't need to. Those of us who fired the Mabuse in combat understand what it takes. The strength to control that weapon, the courage to advance it into danger, the skill to put rounds exactly where they need to go. She did that in 1944, when the enemy was the most experienced, most skilled fighting force in the world. And she won. Every engagement, every time. That's the standard she set for all of us who came after. When we were in trouble, when the enemy had us pinned down, we would bring up the 50. And we would remember that an American woman did this first, did it better than anyone, and never failed. That's the legacy. That's what she gave us. The M2 Browning machine gun and Rachel Morrison's story teach us something fundamental. Excellence is not about being fastest or lightest or most technically advanced. Excellence is about working every time, accomplishing the mission every time, and never letting down the people who depend on you. The M2 worked. The MG42 was faster, but the M2 was final. That distinction won battles, won wars, and changed history. When you face challenges that seem overwhelming, remember this. You don't need to be the fastest or the flashiest. You need to be reliable, effective, and unstoppable. Build your skills like John Browning built his machine gun.
Make them so fundamentally sound that they work under any conditions. Then, apply them with overwhelming force when needed.
That's how you win, not through technical tricks or clever shortcuts, but through solid capability applied with determination. Rachel Morrison proved this on battlefields across Europe. Every time she pressed that butterfly trigger, the mission got done. Every time her squad needed her, the M2 delivered. That's the standard we should all aspire to in whatever we do. Be the person who delivers when it matters. Be the one who never fails when lives depend on you. Be reliable, be effective, be final. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.